So, there are three periods in the development of the English language. First you have Old English, and sometimes they spell that with an extra E to make it look extra old-fashioned. And then you had what they call Middle English. And then that developed over time and words changed and became what we call Modern English. Modern English is what we speak today. You and I speak Modern English. That's what it's called that we speak. By raise of hands, any guesses as to which of these three Shakespeare was speaking? Fair? Middle is an excellent, excellent guess. It's what many of my college students guess. It is completely and totally wrong. Okay? Very good. Thank you. Shakespeare speaks Modern English. Let me say this again very clearly, because it's something that even most of my adult actors I work with don't get. Shakespeare speaks Modern English, the same English we speak today. Not Old English, not even Middle English. Shakespeare speaks Modern English. We'll talk about how that is. To give you an example, this word, how do you pronounce it? Right, absolutely. That's how we say it. That's how Shakespeare would have said it. That's the Modern English pronunciation. In Middle English, that word is pronounced knisht, which sounds like someone sneezing. In Old English, that word does not even exist. Old English is closer to German than it is to English. Later on, like in your senior year, you may read the poem Beowulf, which is written in Old English. And you have to read it in a translation. Like you have to read something translated from German or from Spanish, because it's so different. But Shakespeare does not speak Old English. Shakespeare doesn't even speak Middle English. Shakespeare speaks Modern English. 95% of the words he uses are the exact same words with the exact same pronunciations and the exact same meanings we use today. There's a very small percent, because he was writing just as Middle was turning into Modern, there's a very small percent of words that we're unfamiliar with. He might say thee and thou instead of you and your. He might conjugate words differently. He might say goest instead of just go, or doest instead of just do. But that's a tiny 3 to 4 to 5%. 95% of his words are exactly the same words we say today. So this raises a question. If he's not prissy and fancy, and he's not speaking Old English, then why is he so hard to understand? Because he is. When you first hear Shakespeare, it is not easy to understand. It certainly doesn't sound like a conversation between us today. The reason for this is that Shakespeare's plays have a secret. Shakespeare's plays are not just plays. Shakespeare's plays are actually also poems from beginning to end. Every single time a character opens their mouth to speak, they speak in poetry. Sometimes that poetry has a rhythm and we call it verse. Sometimes that poetry is more free form and we call it prose, but it's always poetry. The characters' emotions are so big they can't speak regularly. They speak in poems because that matches their emotions. And poems are harder to understand than regular speech. They're also harder to write. How many of you have ever written a poem before in your life? Many of us have. I find it very hard, I'll be honest with you. My brother, it's very easy for my brother. My brother can write a sonnet in 10 minutes and I hate him for it. It takes me, an hour to work on it. Imagine, and that's like 14 lines. Imagine writing a 2 to 3 hour play that is all poetry from beginning to end. Imagine how hard that is. Imagine writing 37 plays like that, because that's what Shakespeare did. 37 plays, every one of them poetry from beginning to end. Now, and that's the bargain he makes. He says it's going to be a little bit hard to understand, because poetry is hard to understand. But he says in return, it will be more emotional. I mean, that's why we give one another love poems, right? We don't give each other love memos, or love algebra, or love emails. We send love poetry, because poetry is how you express emotion. And his characters' emotions are so big. If any of you are fans of musical theater, we see that with musical theater, right? They talk normally, and then their emotions get so big that they have to express it in another way, so they start singing. That's the only way they can get the emotion out. In Shakespeare's plays, their emotions are always so big they have to speak in poetry the whole time. Now, it may seem strange. I'll just take a quick moment here. It may seem strange to think of this bargain that Shakespeare makes. It's going to be a little harder to understand in return for being more emotional. But we make that bargain every day when we listen to music, to song lyrics. Song lyrics are a type of poetry, and they're used to make a song more emotional, but sometimes they're not easy to understand. I would like you to think of one of your favorite songs, specifically a song where the lyrics mean something to you. So Nothing by Justin Bieber. the point being, think of the first time you heard that song. You may not have understood every single line of the whole song the first time you heard it. You might have had to hear it 2 or 3 times to figure out, oh, that's what they're talking about there. They're making this comparison kind of thing. There may still be that one line in the chorus, you have no idea what they were actually talking about. But it doesn't stop you from understanding the song and having a more emotional relationship to the song because of that use of language, that playing with language. The other thing that does it a lot is rap, of course. And in fact, I would say the closest thing that we have to Shakespeare today are not scholars and professors at Harvard. The closest living thing we have to Shakespeare today are rap artists, because they're doing what Shakespeare did. I know it sounds very strange, the skinny white boy from Utah saying that Shakespeare is like a rap artist, but it's very true. Rap artists do what Shakespeare did. They play with language, they play with syntax, they invent words. We'll talk about that. And frankly, rap is, if you're just reading it on the page, very hard to understand. Almost impossible to understand, in fact. If you're just reading, if you have no idea of the context, it's nonsense. To demonstrate this, very quickly, I would like to do a very short dramatic reading in my best, clear English teacher voice of a classic poem by Kanye West called Gold Digger.
Oh my gosh.
Just a very short section of this. And just as I'm reading this, I'm trying to make it clear, just imagine how hard this is to understand if you don't know these terms. Cutie the Bomb met her at the beauty salon with a baby Louis Vuitton under her underarm. She said, I can tell you rock, I can tell by your charm, for as girls you got flock. I can tell by your charm and your arm, but I'm looking for the one, have you seen her? My psychic told me she had an ass like Serena, Trina, Jennifer Lopez, 4 kids, and I got to take all that badass to the show. So, it's impossible to understand. If you don't know who Louis Vuitton is and sort of what that means and the status that has, if you were just to read this in English, like, what is he talking about? And
You don't know what Louis Vuitton is?
you talk to Shanice later. Point being here, we do it all the time. We think, well, Shakespeare's hard to understand. Well, so is Kanye West. But the point is, sometimes the sound of something is so fun. And when you hear Kanye West perform this much better than I just did, it's fun to listen to, and you get what he's talking about, even if you don't understand every single word. It's the same exact thing with Shakespeare. Shakespeare plays with language, just like a rap artist. Rap artists, for example, will frequently invent words when they don't have a word that they need, because they need something that has a certain sound, and that word doesn't exist, so they just make it up. I love, for example, the word bling. What does bling mean? Bling. Yes. Like jewelry, exactly. It's so obvious, right? But someone made up that word. I believe it was actually Snoop. It is a word now, but it was made up. If something makes them, that's how all words are created, right? Somebody makes them up. I believe in this case it was Snoop Dogg in the early 90s. But now we use that word, bling, to mean jewelry. We had the word jewelry before, right? But Snoop said, but it doesn't sound shiny enough. So let's take the sound of the light bouncing off those chains, bling, and that becomes the word for the thing itself, automatopoeia. And we now use that word. Rap artists do that all the time. They invent words because they need a word that sounds a certain way. Shakespeare does the same thing. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, and some people have taken debate with this number, but it's in there, so I'm going to quote it. Shakespeare invented 5,000 words that we still use today. Just made them up. Did not exist before Shakespeare. And he made them up just like a rap artist would, and they sound so good we still use them. Words like eyeball, doorknob, upstairs, lonely, kissing, puke. These are words that Shakespeare made up. They knew, for example, what a staircase was, but no one ever said, what do you call that place at the top of the stairs? And Shakespeare said, well, that's top stairs. No. That's overstairs. No. That's upstairs. And it sounds right. Same with bling, it sounds right. They knew what your eye was, but no one ever said, well, what do you call those things in your head? He said, well, they're eyeballs, right? Because they're round. They knew the word alone, but no one had ever said, well, how does it feel to be alone? And Shakespeare said, well, it feels lonely. And we now have that word. So Shakespeare's playing with language because he wants the sound to tell you the meaning. And very frequently, it's the same thing with rap, right? There are words, you don't know necessarily what they are, you don't know what Louis Vuitton is, but you get from the context and from the sound a lot of it. To give you a quick example, there's a play of Shakespeare's called Measure for Measure, in which case there's this guy, his name's Angelo, he's a scumbag. He's a horrible, horrible human being. And he is trying to basically force this woman to have sex with him. It's horrible. He's threatening to kill her sister, her brother, I'm so sorry. And he says to her, "Quit your prolixious blushes." Now, does anyone know what the word prolixious means? No, of course not. No one knows what this word means. My college students know what this word means. I promise you, Shakespeare's illiterate audience did not know what the word prolixious means. But just from the sound of it, prolixious. Is this something nice or something nasty? Nasty! It's got the word ick in the middle of it. It is clearly icky. Now, you can go to a dictionary and you can look it up, and it means someone who pretends to be innocent and pretends to follow all the rules and is very sort of goody two-shoes. And you could have said that. You could have said, "Quit your innocent seeming in honest blushes." But that doesn't sound as nasty as prolixious. So that's the thing that Shakespeare does. He will often choose the sound of a word over just the meaning. And so in order to understand Shakespeare, you must do it out loud. You cannot just sit on your bed and read it with your eyes. It doesn't work that way any more than if you try and just read Kanye West with your eyes, you'll understand it. You have to hear it. It's not meant to be read. Shakespeare did not want you reading his plays. They weren't even published, most of them, until after he died. He wanted you to go to the theater and see it. It wasn't until after he died that two of the people from his company got together and said, "Oh, poor Will is dead. Let's make lots of money." And they got all his plays together and they published a big book called The First Folio, and that's why we have most of his plays. But he didn't want you to read them any more than the guy who wrote Die Hard wanted you to get a copy of the script and sit in a chair with a cup of tea and think, "Oh, look, then there's an explosion. How exciting. Oh, and then Bruce Willis shoots Alan Rickman. How very fun." No! You're supposed to go to the theater and see Bruce Willis shoot Alan Rickman and hear the explosion. It doesn't work just reading it. Same exact thing with Shakespeare. It is meant to be done out loud. So ideally, with Shakespeare, you see it done. You see a production of it. You see actors doing it. If you can't do that, then you do need to do it out loud, even if you're just reading it for English class. Do not try and read it like you'd read a story quietly in your head. It won't work. It won't make sense. It's got to be done out loud, because that's the way he wrote it. Just like rap. Rap must be done out loud, because the sound is the meaning. The other thing that rap does is that there is a rhythm to it, right? There is a beat that it follows. Shakespeare is exactly the same thing. Now, that doesn't mean that there is like a drum line or bass line underneath it when they perform it, but there is a specific rhythm to all of Shakespeare's verse. It's called iambic pentameter, and that's just a fancy word for this sort of heartbeat rhythm that goes da-dum, 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 da-dum. But soft what light through yonder window breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. Just like that. Now, of course, no actor in their right mind is going to go on stage and emphasize like that. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun. You would shoot them. It's obnoxious. But that rhythm, that heartbeat, that pulse is underneath there, and it gives the text energy and moves it forward, and it actually makes it more memorable because it sort of taps into your subconscious.